Today I want to discuss an interesting topic about plans of Sony to end the distribution of games on physical discs. So in our world, in a PC gamers world, this move is almost done. I remember that the last game which I bought on physical disc was about 16 years ago, and from that time I'm not using games on physical discs at all. I just bought them on Steam platform mainly, or on other platforms like, let's say, Battle.net, Ubisoft platform, or Origin platform of EA. So in PC gamers world, the physical discs are almost completely gone. All my friends who are playing on PCs, they don't use physical discs at all. But in the universe of consoles, especially in the universe of Nintendo consoles, PlayStation consoles, and Xbox consoles, physical discs were still very popular. Even though because there was an interesting rant by Angry Joe, because all significant, let's say, YouTubers did a reaction to this move of Sony, but Angry Joe did a very interesting rant. I advise you to watch it. And he and his friends, Alex especially, told him that even though you had discs on, let's say, on PlayStation or on Xbox consoles, but even then you should have, or you almost always must have, internet connection, because you had to download specific patches which are now much more significant than before, because before games had patches, of course, but there were of lesser magnitude and of lesser importance. But right now we see that patches are can be extremely important, change many things, to the point of, for example, if we focus on games like Cyberpunk, we see that patches could reinvent, for example, skill abilities. So right now, even though you had and you have discs on consoles, you still need an internet connection to download other important content. But players were, of course, not happy that Sony announced, and Sony is the owner of PlayStation console, and this Japanese firm and the PlayStation console is the most popular console so far. Maybe Nintendo had sold more of its Nintendo copies, but let's say that PlayStation is the most popular, the most recognizable, and have the best games in the console world. And they announced that at the end of 20, at the beginning of 2028, there will be no new games of on physical discs, only digital copies in their store, or you can buy a box, but not with a physical discs, but with a code. And of course, the situation is similar in regard to GTA 6. Grand Theft Auto 6 will be only in digital form, probably because it's so huge that it would not be significant to have one disc. It would probably be like two or even three Blu-ray discs. So for them it's also inconvenient to do so. And I discussed this with some of my friends who are programmers and who are doing games, and for them, for example, if they can say to me that from the perspective of a firm, of a company, this is a very feasible way to distribute games. And it's preferred because they don't have to order discs, they don't have to print on them some graphics, they don't have to produce the boxes and some information on those boxes and some graphics and so on. So from the perspective of the producer of the game, it's very convenient. Of course, we as players would want to have prices of games be lesser because they don't have to order discs and boxes, but most of us think that it will unfortunately not happen. And I have read some articles about the popularity of physical discs in PlayStation universe, and Sony, and I found two sources, two different opinion, two statistics, and both of them said, one of them said that almost 80% of all games are sold only via digital codes and not on physical discs, and later I found even later source that said that Sony estimates that physical games are only bringing 3% of revenue for them. So it's even lesser than 80%, that 20%, because 80% in that source, 80% is on digital, with digital form, and here we have an information that only 3% of its income is with games on physical discs. So we see that this situation is inevitable, that no one, even in a PlayStation world, is buying physical discs anymore. Of course, as Angry Joe said, we old farts would want to have those physical copies and to, let's say, collect them. For example, you can see here that I have a collection of comics, also for you to have a little, let's say, cooler background. But I'm also want to, for example, collect 4K Ultra HD, Ultra HD Blu-rays, but I think that that Blu-rays and books and comics are still collectible. That's why you can see, for example, here a very famous comics like Tchorgal. So Tchorgal is a very famous Polish comic, but I think it was also published in in the United States and in other countries. Above my Tchorgal, you see Middle Earth History by Christopher Tolkien, and in the background you can see comics from a Polish. It's a Polish special edition of Marvel comics. So people are still, I think, will be collecting physical copies of games, but as I said, as I brought those data, it's almost non-existent in market. We also players are also afraid that because of that the games will be unaffordable for them, because you can use this second-hand market to, for example, buy physical discs or games which are not new. And for example, let's say new version of first God of War was like $35 on in physical store, but on the internet in PlayStation Store it was $70. So we see that these physical copies from second hand can be really good bargain for the player who want to play more than, let's say, one game per month. And unfortunately, console games on Xbox is a lesser problem, because we have Xbox Pass right now, but we don't know if it will stand. But on PlayStation you need to buy new games and they are even more expensive than PC games. And PlayStation, of course, they do discounts later, but they are not as profitable, as good, as low as on PC games like Steam. For example, on Steam you can have games 75% lowered the price, or even 90% in some cases. So PlayStation Store is not as good in lowering the prices of its games, even if it's some kind of a, let's say, summer promotion or summertime or Christmas time. But I think that because of this data, which was shown by Sony and by other sources, they acknowledged that it doesn't make any sense to have a physical copies, because from my point, for example, I like to have everything in digital, because I don't have to keep all those copies of games. And for example, right now I have maybe 200 games on Steam. Earlier in the 90s and in the early 2000s, for example, we could have maybe 30 games, something like that. But right now games can be so cheap on those promotions on Steam and other platforms that you have 200, 300 games on your Steam account. So it's not feasible for us to just have those discs. And of course it's not very well it's not good to manage those discs, because for example, 1 hour I want to play this game, second hour I want to play another game, and so on and so on. I need to change discs, and in the digital form I just click on the game, on the specific game, and it runs and I play it. So it's, for me it's much more convenient that I have those games and they are fully patched to the newest version. This is also important because, for example, games like multi-massive RPG games, or games which are huge, and right now, for example, PlayStation games specifically, or triple A's, are huge games. Their storage space is like 150 gigabytes. So if I want to, for example, upload such a game, it's really difficult for me to even download 150 gigabytes, but it will be also much more difficult to have like 3 or 4 CD discs or DVD discs or Blu-ray discs. For example, I remember that in the late 1990s, Baldur's Gate was published on PC, and this game had 5 CD room, or maybe they were even DVD discs. No, they were CD-ROM discs, but still 5 discs. And later, when Tales of the Sword Coast expansion was released, it was 6 CD. So it was a huge amount of flipping the discs. Later, when there was a DVD version, the problem was gone. But for example, playing and moving to other directions, you need to flop and change your CD-ROM discs. So from the perspective of, let's say, old farts, even like me, I'm 42 years old, and an Angry Joe, I think, is about 40 years, something like that, or maybe a little bit more. We liked physical copies of games, and I liked them on PC, but because of the convenience, I completely abandoned them. And I think that most players, every gamer, every of my friends don't play on physical discs anymore. They bought it in digital form. On PC, it's 16 years old at least that players just play on digital copies, and we see that from the perspective of young players. 15 years old, 10 years old, 20 years old, this is a much more convenient way to manage their games, and they are the reason because they are the vast majority of us, of the players, that this move has begun. I hope that it will not be with disadvantage to us players. I hope that maybe they will a little bit lower the price of the games. Maybe. I hope so. But as I said, even for me, it's much more. The only physical discs of games I have right now are my old games and old exclusives on Xbox 360 and on PlayStation 3. Other than that, I don't use physical copies of discs of games anymore. Yes, so I think that even though players were even pissed off about this move, I think it cannot be changed. It cannot be changed uh, because so many factors implies that it has no sense to have games on physical discs, unfortunately. And to sum it up, you need to upload them you need to update them constantly. Most of the AAA games are more than one Blu-ray discs, so you will have let's say two Blu-ray discs or even three, which for console players is unknown thing. For PC players, it was an issue that if, for example, game have three CD-ROM discs. Later, of course, DVD changed it a little bit, but it was still an issue. But for PlayStation and Xbox fans, it could be an issue if the games were on three or more discs of Blu-ray. They can, of course, be damaged and they can be destroyed. And you also hear sometimes a CD, let's say a CD player and the CD on its own working or doing some noise in the console. So this digital version is for all of us. It's unfortunately better, more practical in normal common sense. So I think that this rant of Angry Joe was interesting to watch, interesting to see his perspective. But I think for most of the players, it will be better, even for PlayStation players, and I think Xbox will do the same in a year or two or something like that. So for us as players, I think it is better move, even though I don't agree with it completely. Let me know in the comments what do you think about this issue, this problem, this situation.